What's happening, everyone, and welcome back to the Pathways to Success podcast. On the show today, I have Lara Korba, and she is the Chief Executive Officer at Journey of Hope Grief Support Center.
Yes.
Lara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And shout out to Dick Evans, who created this introduction.
Yes. He's a great guy.
He's a great guy and a character himself. So, well, Lara, before we kind of jump into the conversation, tell us a little bit more about Journey of Hope. What is the organization and how does it serve the community?
Sure. So Journey of Hope is a Journey of Hope Grief Support Center. So we help children and their families who are grieving the death of a loved one. So we help children as young as age 3 and their families or adult caregivers, usually right after, very quickly after they've lost somebody. And we really kind of give them a safe space to express their feelings, but also really teach them a healthy way to mourn, because big feelings are going to come out. If they don't come out in a healthy way, they'll come out in an unhealthy way. So we've been around for 21 years in North Texas. We serve over 10 counties. And we're one of the few organizations doing what we do. So I'm very passionate about what we do and why we do it.
Wow. So how do you go about doing so and helping individuals overcome it?
Sure. So we, most of our referrals come from the school system. So school counselors, we do outreach with school districts, faith communities, hospitals, hospices, first responders, anybody who is going to be aware that there's a death in a child's life.
Right.
They're referred to us. They come in, the family, have a conversation with our chief program officer, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's fantastic. And sort of determine the family's readiness for our program. And then they'll come into our program. Children are placed in groups based on age, and adults based on type of loss. And they can stay in the program for as long as they need to. We don't charge our families anything. And what we deliver a developmentally appropriate curriculum, which is based on best practices and industry research. So what we do with the 3-year-olds will be different than what we do with the middle schoolers or the high schoolers or the adults.
Got it. And as far as like grief goes, is it specific to a loved one passing? Like, what are the different...
Yeah, so it's around the death of a loved
Gotcha.
one, and any and all kinds of death we see, and we get everything from a long-term expected sort of impending illness to very sudden and very traumatic deaths, and everything in between.
What are some of the success stories that have come out of the organization that stick out to you?
Gosh, two come to mind right away. One is a family. They started coming several years ago, about 4 years ago, and it was a little girl who had lost her mother. It was a murder, so it was a very, very traumatic death. There were all kinds of complicating issues. You know, nobody's family story is simple. There are always all kinds of issues going on in addition. This child came into our program with a lot going on. And 4 years later, the parent came and sort of said, "Hey, I think you're doing really well. I think, maybe we don't have to keep coming." And this little girl said, who's now middle school, said, I need to keep coming because I need to help the kids who are continuing to come in now. So that recovery was just so full circle, to the point where not only were they not so profoundly in their own grief, but they had found enough of a solution and enough hope that they then wanted to give that back to the other children coming in, which I think is one of the most beautiful stories I've seen in our program since I've been working there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, what would you consider to be the steps to address grief in the most healthy way?
Well, the first thing is really, I'm going to step back before it's, what we do.
Sure.
I think the real magic of our program is that, first of all, it's recognizing that a child needs help, because we don't see that very often.
Mm-hmm.
But once they come into our program, there's counseling and there's peer group grief support. They're both really good and really effective, but very different. So when a child goes and speaks to a counselor, they'll learn different ways of dealing with their feelings and talk about their feelings. But grief is very isolating for everybody, and especially children. Mm-hmm. They feel very different than their peers. If you're 6 and you've lost a parent, it's very different going to school. It's hard to talk to other kids about it because they don't understand. They're sometimes afraid of the topic. Mm-hmm. They'll come into the group with other children their age, and suddenly they're not alone. They're not weird for feeling what they feel. It's normal. It's okay. It's a safe space. And for the first time, somebody gets where they are, how they're feeling, and they understand their journey. And that to me is almost magical because they can't get that anywhere else. And so I think once they have that and they have this safe space where they can kind of come and exhale, that's when the work can begin.
I think you also mentioned that sometimes it's not as easy to spot these symptoms as what people may think. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so grief in children is different than grief in adults. And I think one of the challenges that we have is we don't understand that. And so we look for adult symptoms of grief in children. And when you do that, you don't see it. So, there's that very popular series, What to Expect When You're Expecting. Mm-hmm. There's What to Expect the First Year, What to Expect the Toddler Years. And a lot of that is because there are lists and lists of illnesses in there with symptoms. Because if you go and you look for adult symptoms of some of these illnesses, in children, you'll miss it. Because the symptoms present differently in children than they do in adults. Grief is no different, in my opinion. If we look for, withdrawing and sadness and not able to eat and wanting to pull the covers up over our head and, crying all the time, we may see a little bit of that. But children are going to maybe be happy and playing and angry. And it's everything because they're children. And so we won't necessarily see what we're expecting to see. And the mistake we then make is we say, they're fine. Kids are resilient. And I've had friends who their children have lost one parent. I'll say, how are they doing? They're doing great. Oh, so much better than I thought. Because they're not seeing what's necessarily in front of them because it doesn't look the same in kids.
So what would be the best way to sort of probe for that?
It's just very simply to know that when a child has experienced a profound loss or any kind of trauma, there is going to be an enormous amount going on underneath the surface. So even if you don't see it, you know it needs addressing. Mm-hmm. And it's simply just knowing that when there's been a death, that child needs help, no matter what they look like on the outside. Their life has been torn open. Mm-hmm. It's impossible for them not to be really hurting on the inside, although they may not be showing it. And they may not even understand, they won't understand the depth of it themselves.
I feel like this is very mission-driven work that you're doing. So I know that you have a story that really kind of brings to light like the work that you do. So when you tell your story, where do you start?
Well, when I don't tell my story very often because it's not about me. It's right. Really about what we do and it's about our kids. But
sure.
Why I got into this or what kind of led me into this is I feel like my story around this began decades ago. So when I was a little girl, I lost my father. I want to say unexpectedly. It wasn't unexpected to anyone else. It was unexpected to me. So my father had many heart attacks over my lifetime. But he'd gone into hospital and come out, and he'd gone into ICU. It was very normal for us to be in ICU, mm-hmm. and he would come out. And so the last time he had a heart attack, I didn't think anything of it. I thought, well, every time he goes in hospital, he comes out, and this time he didn't. So for me, it was very unexpected. And like I've said with these children, my life was, in one instant, completely different. There was a before and there was an after, and it was probably the single defining moment of who I am in my life. And it happened at a very young age. So, this was the 80s. There was no mental health understanding when it came to children. And again, people's comment was, kids are resilient. I looked happy and fine on the outside. People didn't understand what was going on the inside. So the funeral's all over, and you just kind of go back to school and carry on as if everything's normal, but nothing's normal. And there were these enormous, we call them big feelings in our program, big feelings of pain and anger and confusion and guilt and all kinds of things that I didn't know what to do with. And as a little person, when you don't have a way to deal with that or express that. We call that disenfranchised grief. It has nowhere to go, and it kind of incubates over years. And for me, there was no healthy outlet. There was no one to talk to. I felt very different than my friends. I felt very alone. Even in my family, where my mother was grieving, my brother was grieving, I still felt very alone in it because we didn't talk about it. And I don't know if that was just our family or just that generation. We didn't really talk about things. So I didn't have the healthiest expression of grief in my teen years. I found various outlets to distract and to not feel, none of which were very healthy. And really that one single event, kind of knocked me down. And it took me a lot of years to get back up again. And I'm very lucky that I did. And my life turned out great, as it were. But I kind of lost a lot of years that I didn't have to lose. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want that to happen to other children. The other thing is, children who lose a parent are 5 times more likely to die by suicide, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 10 times more likely to use alcohol and drugs, and are 20 times greater risk for behavior disorders. So we're trying to catch kids early, so that we don't have to, wait until they've gone down those paths. And then your success rate is much lower. If we can catch these kids really early, we can help them and we can guide them very gently and lovingly and with a lot of wisdom into healthy paths of mourning. So my path, I can't help but just talk about journey. My path, what was, the silver lining in it for me, I don't really like that term, but the positive in it for me is it gave me a tremendous passion for helping others and knowing I needed to make a positive contribution to the world, especially helping people without a voice, especially helping people who are vulnerable. So I went and did my MBA because there was a school in Canada, great school. One of the specializations was corporate responsibility. So the way I saw it is I looked at the problems in the world and I said, okay, the power is in multinationals. If I'm going to make a difference, I've got to do it from the inside out. So that was my path. I loved that career. I did corporate responsibility consulting for a long time. And then I took time off and had my children. And when I came back, consulting is not what you can do with young kids. Mm-hmm. You can't be traveling. You can't be in England when, there's a tooth that falls out or something. So I went to nonprofit and I worked for a number of fantastic organizations here in Dallas. And I was working for one, ironically, that they did work. My father was born and raised in East Africa, and his family were great philanthropists in East Africa. And this organization helped the same group of people that my dad and his family were passionate in helping. So there was kind of that interesting tie there.
Yeah.
But while I was working there, I got a call from a recruiter. And she said, she saw me on LinkedIn and she saw that I had a pretty decent network in nonprofit. And said she was hiring for this position. Did I know anyone? So she's telling me about the organization, and then I asked about the mission. Well, she said she couldn't tell me the name of the organization, but she would tell me the mission. She told me the mission, and it was helping children who'd lost a loved one. So, of course, that is completely resonating with me, mm-hmm. and it's really landing. So we had a number of conversations. And finally, I said, I think I do know someone who'd be really good in this role. So I was hired in 2016, and I've been here ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you hope to accomplish? What are your goals with the organization?
Well, so, I have a very big vision for the organization. Mm-hmm. We've been in Plano and in Frisco. We've been in Plano for 20 years, Frisco for 1 year. So 21 years we've been around. Mm-hmm. There's so little help of this nature. And as I've mentioned, we have families driving in from 10 counties on school nights. Mm-hmm. That's how little help there is. So my vision is that in North Texas, everyone who needs us will have access to appropriate support. So I have a growth agenda. And this year we're actually growing into North Dallas. We have about 25% of our families driving in from Dallas County and counties to the south. And so DISD and a number of school districts to the south have asked us to be present, have a presence in Dallas, so families aren't having to drive so far. So we are expanding into Dallas this year, and I want to just keep growing and really have strong, sustainable growth for a very long time, for as long as people need us. And it's not like death is going to stop happening. So
right.
We're going to need to be around for a while, and I hope we are.
Can you tell us about the magnitude of the issue? Like, how many persons does this affect, would you say?
Sure. So there have been two studies done that I find really credible. One says 1 in 6, one says 1 in 10 children will lose a parent or sibling by the time they're 20. Mm-hmm. That looks like about 376,000 kids in North Texas. So you won't always see someone who's really, really hurting. But if you know that there are children in your classroom, in your children's classrooms, who've lost somebody, they're really, really hurting, and they really, really need help.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you're looking for partners and also support. How can the community support you?
Lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So part of what it takes a village. It really does. We are a really small staff with an enormous number of volunteers. We have about 600 plus volunteers who help us put this thing together. I mean, it really takes a village. So we need, especially as we grow into Dallas, we need allies in Dallas. People who understand or connect with our mission in whatever way. And just want to be a part of that, or part of that team and part of that village. Sometimes that means volunteers, and some of our volunteers are facilitators. So we have people who we train. We put them through a weekend of intensive training, mm-hmm. and they can lead and facilitate groups. That's only twice a month. And then we have a number of different volunteer opportunities, from making meals. We serve dinner to our families on every group night. If you can imagine, you're driving in from 85 miles away and you've got 3 kids to wrangle, and there's just one of you, and you're steeped in your grief, and you're trying to get these kids to a different county. Getting dinner on the table can really be a challenge. So it's really important that we always serve dinner at every group. Mm-hmm. We have community members who come in and put those meals on. So everything from school groups to companies to church groups, any kind of group you can imagine. We have families who will come and do it, mm-hmm. and just cook dinner and put dinner on, and they get to serve them to our families. That's something that we need help with. We have supply drives and teddy bear drives. One of the things that we do is, the very first time a family comes in to talk about their story, they come and they meet with our chief program officer. I mentioned she's an LMFT. And for some kids, this is the first time talking about it. And so when they come in, we have a big teddy bear bench. And so, they're talking about some pretty big feelings that are kind of hard. And so we like to have them leave with something warm and snuggly. So they get to choose a stuffed animal from our big teddy bear bench. You would be shocked at how old some of these kids are who are choosing a teddy bear.
Yeah.
And, they keep them. They're really valuable and really special. One of our facilitators went through a program many, many years ago when she was a little girl and her parents died. And she'll tell you she still has that teddy bear today. Wow. It's so special for her. So teddy bear drives, supply drives. And then, of course, we need financial mm-hmm. Donations as well. It allows us to offer a program for free. So not everybody who needs our program can't afford it, but we never want that to be a barrier to participation ever. I mean, we have had families who the primary income earner has died, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do in 3 months. Mm-hmm. How are they going to pay the rent? How are they going to pay the mortgage? So having to pay for help for your kids is sometimes falls pretty far down on the priority list when you're just trying to figure out the basics.
So what else? Close us out with some final thoughts about, what you think our listeners should know about Journey of Hope, your mission, and what you're trying to accomplish.
So, well, first of all, just know that we're here, Journey of Hope. Our mm-hmm. website is johgriefsupport.org, so that if you know a family who's experiencing this, and you will 6 months or a year from now, you can say, hey, I did hear about this organization. Please give them a call and keep that top of mind, who we are. And And also just know that if there is a child who's lost somebody, they do need help. They may not look like it. They may be smiling and happy. One quick story before we close. The day that my mom told me that my father had died, she called me in, we're sitting on the living room sofa, and she told me, and I don't remember the whole conversation, but I do remember that I asked if I could go back out and play with my friends after, because kids are different, and how we express it is different. And we're not necessarily going to, like I said, burst in tears and stay that way. We're going to go back and be kids again. So just know that even though a child looks okay, may look okay, may not look okay, they need help, because it's like an iceberg. There's an immense amount going on underneath. And finally, if anything that I've talked about resonates with somebody, and they want to do something, they say, I get that. I had that experience when I was a child, or I have a friend who experienced that, or I just want to help. Please contact us, and I'll be more than happy to hook you up in whatever way that your gifts, are calling you to give back.
I love it. So one more time, Lara, with the website and social, and how else do people connect with you? Tell us all that.
So our website is johgriefsupport.org. Our phone number is 972-964-1600. We are on Facebook, JOH Grief Support. Journey of Hope Grief Support Center. We're on LinkedIn, not so active on LinkedIn because I'm pretty much the only person that posts, but
okay.
Primarily our website and Facebook are the two best ways to find us in social media.
Gotcha. And we'll make sure to capture all of this in the show notes as well.
Wonderful.
So, Lara, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think what you're doing is amazing.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to support you in any way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And everyone else, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Pathways to Success. As always, make sure to subscribe, comment, and share. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Pathways to Success.